All right. Thanks guys for taking a little bit of time out of your day to come and listen to me give a spiel about some scientific stuff here. I'm going to try to simplify it for Chris over there just a little bit, keep things nice and simple. So kind of today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about periodization, right? Periodization really has to do with strength themes, about how we kind of go about increasing strength or how we progress our athletes. And so today we're going to talk about linear versus non-linear, and then we're going to get a little bit deeper into it. We're going to talk about kind of the theory of autoregulation and what that means and how we can apply it to the overall broad concept of strength training. So from here, right, same thing, we're just going to kind of talk about the concept of periodization. So really all it is a planned manipulation of training variables. So it can be a little bit different depending on what time of year, what phase you happen to be going into, but really all that means is I'm going to change around the volume, I'm going to change around my training frequency, or I'm going to change the intensity somehow. So manipulating those variables, either up or down, that's the concept of periodization, big picture. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper as far as linear versus non-linear. So if we're looking at the linear side, it was basically the original kind of concept is credited to Tudor Vampa, who's one of the original guys. It's one of the OGs of strength and conditioning. Always starts with a little bit higher volume with a little bit lower intensity. So that's where your GPP phase is going to come in. That's it, and from there it progresses through phases, right? So each block has an individual theme. So it usually goes from general prep, then you're looking at a hypertrophy, so just overall lean muscle mass increase, then you're going into strength work, and then you turn that strength into power. More often than not, you're going to use linear loading, which is, might be 3 sets of 5 1 week at 75%. The next week it might be 3 sets of 4 at 80, and then 3 by 3 at 85, however you progress it. So that's the linear loading, which is percentage based. Now if you're looking at non-linear is a little bit more broad because it encompasses more than one thing, right? So it's got multiple different things that can fall under that non-linear kind of tag. But the most common example is going to be your conjugate system, and that's usually the West Side method, and you're looking at 2 days of max strength work and then 2 days of power work. And the reason why that makes it non-linear is because you're training two things at the same time. You're not just focusing on one individual theme, so I can train multiple things at the same time. I'm developing multiple qualities while they're not regressing, okay? So then autoregulation, which is what we're going to delve into a little bit deeper, a little bit more towards the end of the presentation, is the APRE protocol. So that's kind of what we talked about at the beginning. It's autoregulation. That one has been popularized by Mel Siff, who's kind of the original guy who kind of brought that theory into existence. And then it's been expanded on by Brian Mann and some guys from the University of Missouri who've kind of actually put it in a little bit more applicable training. So now we're just going to look at a little bit of a linear periodization example just so we can kind of get our eyes on what we're going to be looking at here. Like we talked about, right? Training volume is always going to start high. Training intensity is always going to start low. And then as we progress, right, our volume is going to drop as our intensity increases. So you're getting an inverse relationship between the two. As one goes up, one goes down. Like we talked about, if you look at this picture over here on the right, it's going to kind of list our phases off like we talked about. So hypertrophy and endurance, so GPP hypertrophy like we talked about, and then you're going to go to basic strength, strength power, and then peak before your competition. But as you can see, this is just another kind of visual representation of what we're talking about here. As volume starts high, intensity is going to go up, the repetitions are going to drop as we continue to get a little bit closer to our peak. Now the issues with linear periodization, okay? It's great for beginners. It's one of those things that when you're first starting off, it's what you see more often than not. It's, we're going to start here because you're new, we're going to build our way up through some things. But, like we talked about, you can only develop one thing at a time with linear periodization. So you're neglecting other areas of training as far as your actual lifting progression goes. From there, linear loading, so like we talked about, that's another kind of a subset of that linear periodization. It doesn't account for lifestyle influences or lifestyle factors. So I stayed up too late last night, and now I have to go into the weight room, and I need to hit 95% of my max for 2 reps. And sometimes our bodies just don't allow us to do stuff like that. Our central nervous system might be activated, lack of sleep, my girlfriend broke up with me, my dog died, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of things that we can't kind of account for, and our bodies sometimes just can't function for those numbers that we need them to function for. Now, non-linear example, kind of like what we talked about, I just picked the most simple one before we get into the APRE and kind of go over the conjugate method, and that's the west side barbell, where you more often than not, okay, you're more often you're pairing the max effort method and the dynamic effort method together. But again, you can mix and match depending on what kind of the season that you're in or what part of your training program that you're in. So you could do max effort with repeated effort, so that way you're working on strength and hypertrophy at the same time. If you're a little bit further out and you don't need your power work yet, nothing too crazy, but you're maximal above 90%, so that's your max effort. Heavy strength training. Dynamic effort's going to be more in that 40 to 70% range. You're just focusing on being explosive. We're trying to move weight for speed. And then repeated effort method, like we talked about, it's more of your hypertrophy. It's sub-max, higher than 6 reps. Then on the right side, we've got just a little bit of a weekly example of what that would look like, how we would split that up. If you're looking at a Monday, it's going to be your max effort upper, so you're looking at heavy pressing. Dynamic effort on Wednesday is going to be your next day, so lower body. So now, as you can see, we're getting a little bit more explosive with some box jumps. Moderately heavy set of 3, where you're still trying to drive through and create power on the sumo deadlift. Thursday, dynamic effort upper, so now your med ball throws, just really being ballistic, powerful through the top part of our body. And then max effort lower for our last day, so again, heavy lower body strength training day. Now, we're kind of circling back to the APRE like we talked about from the beginning, all right? So this is autoregulatory progressive resistance exercise. So very fancy way of saying self-regulating. So basically all this does is it allows us to kind of maximize strength gains at an individual's pace. We're going to get into how it does that and why it does that, but really it kind of focuses on your body and how it's responding to stimulus over, you know, the previous couple of days, how your body is dealing with stress. This will allow us to train in the optimal range depending on where we are that day. So it also prevents adaptation to resistance training because the reps are governed, right, like we just talked about, by their ability on that specific day. That's really what it comes down to. That's the take-home point, is it's about a specific day rather than you need to hit 95% today regardless of how you're feeling. So now autoregulation versus linear periodization. So like I said, we're getting a little bit deeper. We're not going to go too crazy, but this is one of the first studies that was kind of put into effect. This was by Brian Mann at the University of Missouri, kind of like what we talked about at the beginning of how it's actually been practically applied. So we're looking at linear loading versus APRE in college-age athletes and the results that they had using this training cycle. So basically all they did was they measured max bench press, they measured max squat, and they measured the 225 bench press test. They compared the two. They split the team up into 2 groups. You had one group using linear periodization. You had one group using the APRE protocol. After 6 weeks, they retested the numbers from there, and that's what our data is going to show on the next slide. Okay, but here on the right, this is just showing us the adjustment protocol and how APRE actually works. It's actually a pretty interesting system to me. So if we're looking at our 6-rep protocol, which is the one that they used mostly for the study, my third set of my work sets, okay, no matter what I get right here, it's going to adjust my next set, my 4th set, my rep out set. So let's say I get 5 to 7 reps, so I hit 6 reps on bench press. That lets me know that that's the optimal weight for me to be training at there, and my next set, my last set of the day, will stay the same. That's why we got that no change right there off to the side. If I only hit 3 to 4, let's say I stayed up too late, like we talked about earlier, maybe I'm stressed out, I got finals, I'm a college-aged athlete, I only hit 3 to 4, this shows me that my adjustment for my last set, I probably need to go down 5 pounds to keep me in that range, that 5 to 7 reps that we're looking for. So again, it all fluctuates depending on your performance for that day. Now, looking at the results a little bit, so APRE had greater results in all 3. So 1 rep bench increased, 1 rep squat was increased, and 225 bench press test was increased. So if you look at the numbers here, bench press, okay, APRE 93.4 versus negative 0.40 for linear periodization. Now this is in newtons, so it's not exactly in pounds, right? But that basically means after 6 weeks, our bench press with APRE went up 20 pounds versus non-discernible change, right, for our linear periodization. Squat, Big numbers, right? 192.7 versus 37.2 newtons, which comes out to about 43 pounds versus 8-pound increase after 6 weeks. And if I'm training hard for 6 weeks, I would rather put 45 pounds on my squat than 8 pounds on my squat, obviously. 225 bench test for our last little number here. You went up about 3 reps with APRE. So if you were doing 21 when they started, most of them on average were doing about 24 at the end, whereas there wasn't much of a change at all, right, for our last group with linear periodization. Now, conclusions, like we kind of talked about, right? Everything has its own space within a system, depending on athlete's age, depending on training, duration of training is the word I'm looking for, or, what type of the year we happen to be in. So linear periodization, it's been around for a really long time, and it's been around for a long time because it's effective. But it's effective for, I would say, more novice lifters and people that aren't quite as advanced, that haven't been in a structured strength and conditioning program for a long period of time. Like we talked about, right? If I train only one thing, eventually my other strength qualities are going to start to decrease, whether that, that applies to everything. That applies to flexibility, applies to strength training, hypertrophy, whatever the case may be. So especially with strength training, after about 2 to 4 weeks not working on max strength, strength levels begin to drop. And the same goes for power and on from there. So APRE, again, very, very simple and effective system to use, and it adjusts daily depending on the athlete's performance, allows us to kind of stay in that sweet spot that we're looking for, to train in on a daily basis. So, got any questions?
Can you mix APRE with like a dynamic? So obviously you kind of have a little bit more of a strength phase. Can you do like 2 days of APRE and dynamic effort method? So almost
Absolutely.
more like the West Side.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that because that's exactly how my high school program was structured for my preseason. We would do max effort days. We would start at 6 rep at the beginning of the summer for max effort, and then after about 6 weeks, we drop it down to APRE 3, and we're pairing it, especially that last month or so, pairing it with 2 dynamic effort days. So I kind of did repeated effort in June, so Tuesdays and Thursdays rather than power work would be more repeated effort work, so kind of that hypertrophy. And then once I got to July and August, then Tuesdays and Thursdays would switch to our power days, and then you're kind of right there, staying in that same side, west side model.
Do you find that there's pretty good changes with that?
I used APRE in the winters and the summers, and my very first winter using it, I had 3 kids put on about 95 pounds on their squat over about 3 months. Summertime, still on average, you're looking at about 30 to 40 pounds over a couple months, and for me personally, it was always very, very effective. So I kind of ran through a cycle of it because I wanted to see it after I'd read all the research, and it was very, very easy for guys to know how to adjust their weight and know when to go up and down, and the results, the guys would just blow up. They just went through the roof. And strength, and obviously when it's strength training time, that's what we're looking for. We need to get those guys as strong as possible, especially at the high school and youth level. It's a really easy and simple system to kind of incorporate.